Today is February 22. Ukraine Media Center Ukr.Inform continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov, and we're starting our event, which is happening thanks to the support of the Embassy of the United Kingdom in Ukraine. And we will talk about the hybrid war of Russia in Ukraine and how to win in the information front. So whom are we going to talk to? First of all, it's Ihor Solovei, head of the Center for Strategic Communication and Information of Security, who was one of the developers of this guide. Then it's Hanna Krasnostup, acting CEO of the Directorate of Information Policy and Information Security of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. Victoria Zrazhevska, Director of the Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security Training Department. Ihor Rozkladai, Deputy Director, Chief Expert on Media Law and Center for Democracy and Law of Ukraine, and Matthew Booth, UK Strategic Communication Advisor to the Government of Ukraine. So, first of all, we would like to ask Mr. Ihor about this guide, how it was developed, where can it be found. Please take the mic. 1 2 1 2. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to greet everybody in this platform of Ukraine Media Center Ukr.Inform. I'm happy to see partners, friends, and colleagues here. First of all, I would like to say that it's an important event for us because we are presenting the results of more than 1 year of work of our training center. At the same time, I would like to ask you not to perceive this guide as the universal pill which can solve all the problems of hybrid war after you take it, and it's not a recipe to achieve this result. This guide is a kind of a spinning for a fishing stick, not a fish. It encourages the people to differ, to counteract the information influence, to tell manipulations from truth, to tell information from psyops. Secondly, this guide is interesting because it's based on the practical experience of the trainers of our training center, the Center of Strategic Communications, OSINT specialists, analysts, fact-checkers who during this last year or more than a year were engaged in training activities. And Victoria may tell you more about this. She's the head of our training department, and based on the experience of our partners from United Kingdom, Sweden and other NATO countries. In fact, we comply with the regulations and requirements for the entrance for joining NATO in the information sphere. And from the center, from the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, we want to thank the partners who helped putting together and publishing this guide. And to summarize, just a couple of words, whom this guide is for. First of all, it is developed for the specialists. The majority of those present here are such specialists, the specialists who are involved in public communication in government agencies. But moreover, another important category of the recipients of such guide are the cadets, students of the higher educational institutions and specialized educational institutions who study PR, journalism, international information. So the specialists who will work in the communication bodies of the state agencies, of the government agencies, and we hope that after training in those educational institutions using this guide, state communication bodies will receive or will get the high-skilled specialist employed. And I will wrap up at this and pass the microphone to Hanna Krasnostup. Well, I have a question to Ms. Hanna. I understand that this guide is more of a recommendation nature, but what are the prospects that this discipline of the discipline of proper work with information, of information hygiene, it will be mandatory for government officials, for government employees? Thank you for your question. I will start with an answer right away. The critical thinking of population, well, is not only important for state employees. We're talking about the nationwide program of information literacy. It starts with the kindergarten, then goes to school and the higher educational institutions. It doesn't matter whether you are a government official or government employee or just a regular citizen. We have all to have skills to counter disinformation. We have to understand what are deep fakes. Those are the skills that everybody should possess. It doesn't matter who we are. What's important is that every day with all our actions we bring our victory closer. And availing myself of opportunity, I want to ask my colleagues from the Center of Information Security and Strategic Communications for this wonderful guide. And I hope that we will have an opportunity, each of us present here, to get familiarized with this guide and to implement the recommendations in our life. Yes, it's of recommendation nature, and us as the Ministry of Information, of Culture and Information Policy, we will forward it to our colleagues in military administration and local administrations so they use it during their work. Like 5 years ago, it was difficult to find information, but things changed, especially during the war. We were picking information piece by piece, but now there is such an amount of information, or specifically disinformation, just like one of our Ukrainian writers said, it irradiates in your shoulder. Everybody should know how to double check the information, where to get the official information. Now we're in Ukrainian National Information Agency, Ukrinform, is the real source of faithful information, verified information. Please use it. Please visit our website. And also I would like to say that counteracting disinformation and media literacy are the pillars our information front is currently founded on. This guide is not the first step, but it's just another step undertaken by the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy in cooperation with the Center for Strategic Communication and Information Security. We also we also make the refreshment trainings in countering disinformation. We have a wonderful project, the School for Counteracting Misinformation, and my colleague Victoria will tell you in more details about that. Victoria, please. So how will you implement all this practical knowledge for every government employee? Yes, thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to tell about our School for Counteracting Misinformation. It's our project that we, with the Center for Strategic Communications and the Center for Democracy and Rule of Law, we implemented with the financial support of the government of Sweden. Many of our colleagues and partners get involved with consultancy support, and this school is for training government employees in the skills of counteracting disinformation and strategic communication. Within the year 2020, when our school was just opened and continued its development, we had more than 30 trainings and more than 700 persons were taking part in such trainings. It's almost important that we consider one of the achievements of our school that last year the center received a state certification for 2 training programs. The National Agency for State Service certified 2 programs, Russian misinformation and counteracting it, and strategic communications in public governance. So it's one of our systemic and big scale steps for implementation those trainings for state employees. And this guide, as Mr. Ihor mentioned, is a result of our training experience, and not only training experience, but the result of activity of the Center for Counteraction of Misinformation, because it includes both methods for counteraction of misinformation, what should be done for that specifically, and it has fundamental theoretical knowledge what Russian propaganda is, how it works, and what's its influence not only on Ukraine but on each of us as a civilians and government officials. And I would like to emphasize that this guide is really oriented at government employees and the representatives of local governments and state administrations, but it will also be useful for all the citizens, because it says in simple words, it explains in simple words how the Russia does the information warfare and what can everybody do to counteract it, to counteract the information war in a joint effort as the state and the civil organizations together. And I would like to thank and emphasize our partners is the Center for Democracy and Rule of Law, which supports our School for Counteraction of Misinformation, and they reviewed this guide, and and also the government of the United Kingdom. There are representatives for strategic communications from the UK government who consulted us in development of this guide. They have relevant experience, and my colleague will tell you about this. So in this joint effort we can do a lot and bring our victory closer. So please pass the microphone to Mr. Matthew. For example, yesterday there was a question, for example, yesterday BBC World, when they covered the speech of Putin, they invited the husband of Olga Skabeyeva, Mr. Popov. So the question is to you, there is a lot of conclusions in Ukraine as to the hybrid information warfare, but what are the conclusions that the whole world comes to, and what is the use of such guides that you can describe? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was waiting for the translation, so I understood your question entirely. Just to come initially on your response to your question around coverage of Putin's speech yesterday, I think my response to that would probably demonstrate the scale and the breadth of the support from the UK government to Ukraine, which is that rest assured my colleagues in London are having conversations with the BBC around some of the ways which reporting can be careless. And I say careless because I do believe there's no malicious intent whatsoever. It's about, as Victoria was saying, and Anna as well, there is a need for us in government to be informing populations, informing academics, informing journalists, informing the media about the tactics that Russia uses, and even what seems like a careless mistake when you're a journalist and you're working very quickly can actually have very significant repercussions. So I just answer that initially by saying, rest assured, my colleagues are having conversations. To come on to the second point of your question around sort of standards and training, I think those were I think there was 3 things that I wanted to speak on. One was the importance of professional standards when it comes to public sector communications. The second was training. And then the third, where the UK can offer further support in this department. So we have our own models, lots of different models, lots of different structures, lots of different processes, similar to as has been set out in the CSC handbook. We have our resist framework, which is all around countering disinformation, and I suppose it's worth reflecting with the UK government where all of those standards, all of those processes come from. So if you have a job in the public sector in the UK and you work in communications, you are part of the Government Communication Service, the GCS, and that organisation in some form or another, it's a professional body that has loosely existed for about 100 years. It started on the back of the First World War and pretty much started with a mistake. So during the First World War, to try and get British citizens to be more involved and want to feel more animosity towards Germans, what the British government did was start to spread disinformation about the Germans, about that they were crucifying children, about that they were eating people, that they were doing all sorts of terrible things. Of course, none of this was true. It all turned out to not be true and kind of settled into the dust. Now then, when the Second World War came around, the similar situation. This time the government was trying to use the truth. They were trying to inform the population, this is what is happening in Germany, these things are happening. And to begin with, the population of Britain did not believe that because, well, you lied to us about it 20 years ago, so why are you telling the truth now? It's just another lie. And so that mistake, that lesson learned, began what is now the Government Communication Service. This is years and years and decades of learning from our mistakes, learning what doesn't work, responding to things in a crisis, reacting to things. Sometimes there's big wins, sometimes there's big problems and it doesn't work. So over time, those have been refined and refined and refined so that we have these processes like the resist framework, we have our Oasis campaigns tool, we've got all sorts of different tools for the job. And I think what those allow you to do is speak a common language. You speak a common language where you know that even if in my role now based in Kiev, or if in my previous role if I was in the Prime Minister's office, or if I'm talking to the head of comms for a police station in Manchester, I know that we're talking about exactly the same thing. We have the same approach to the same problems. We have the same jargon, the same processes, the same methodologies. So that's one benefit of it, that we're all speaking the same language. The other benefit, I would say, of having these processes is that they're fluid and they evolve and they exist. And so, again, you keep learning from mistakes. What works now in 2023 might not work as well in 2025, but that's okay. You can build that in and you start to work and flex around things. So you're continually evolving and changing around best practice. And I think that leads on to my second point with the best practice. That's around training. I don't think, having things set down and having them standardized, having handbooks is exactly the place to start. You've got a kind of guide, you've got the processes, but then it needs to be taken to the next stage where these things are, as part of new joiners, as part of someone joining, for us, the government communication scheme. It's like week one, doesn't matter what your job is. Week one, you're on training, you're learning these things, you're getting one of these handbooks printed out, you're going to a presentation on how to use it, how to learn it, how to inform it. And sometimes you might sit there in that room, have that learning experience, go away and not think about it for 6 months. But then when it does come up and you have to respond quickly, whether that's to disinformation or to a crisis or to whatever the situation is, you have that and it's embedded. So I think that continual training and workshopping allows for that professionalization across the board. And it also allows for, again, those open conversations about where things aren't working, where there have been mistakes made, and where you can learn and advance and get better from that as well. And I suppose that leads on to the third point I was going to make, which is around the UK support to Ukraine. So I think, as with pretty much every aspect of this war, I hope I'm not over-speaking by saying that our support to Ukraine is unwavering. This will always continue, and I think our systems that we have in the UK government, they're for communications and for countering disinformation. they're good, they're very effective, they're not perfect, nothing is. And so I think we can continue to learn from you guys who are very much the experts. You know, you understand Russia and Russian disinformation far better than anybody else, I think, and you know exactly how to respond to it very effectively. So while we will continue to support with kind of with training, with processes, with showing this is what we do and this is what works for us, a huge part of that conversation is, okay, well, what works for you? You guys know, and keeping that, tweaking models and changing things so that there's a Ukrainian context and a Ukrainian way of doing these things. You know, I'm acutely aware that I'm looking at this wall of memes. You're now world famous for many things, but one of them is just exceptional memes. You would never have seen the UK government doing that. And it's, you know, it's not a, Ihor mentioned earlier the idea of training being a universal, I think you said a universal solution, what we would call in English a silver bullet. You know, one tactic like that is not a silver bullet, but it's great that these things exist, that there is that Ukrainian flavor. So I suppose what I would leave you with as a reflection is that my work, certainly from the British Embassy in Kiev, that continues and continues to support government of Ukraine in various different points around capacity, around insights, around training, around all sorts of things that we can try and help with. That's an open door. Please do. Everyone can come to me if they think there's ideas that we can do. I can't make promises, but I can go back to London and ask them to spend more money, and that's all I can try and do. But as well, I think please rest assured that there is more than ever a lot of colleagues in London sat around helping from afar. It might not be that they're at the British Embassy, but they are working in this space, working and to do lots to support both Ukraine internationally and domestically. So there's collaboration between us, and I hope that that continues. I think it will do. So yeah, it's an open door. If anyone ever has any questions or requests, please do come to me. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Пане Ігорю, в чому полягала роль вашої організації? Що ви можете розповісти про
Mr. Ihor, what was your role in putting together this guide and how to better use it? Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say why it's important to implement this project, because Russian disinformation is not a matter of today or yesterday or 10 years ago. This story starts back in times of the Soviet Union or maybe the Russian Empire. So what is happening now is the change of influence, change of time, but the methods used are very old. They are ancient. So I printed out one of the titles of the training books for KGB, the documents which were unclassified by our colleagues from Baltic countries, the opportunities for using cultural centers of USSR for work in other countries. So it's the way how our immigrant organizations may work abroad. It's not one and only guide like this. There were more like those, and how to counter, which showed us how to counteract that misinformation. So Russian propaganda is deep-rooted, and Ukraine is in a disadvantageous position because we have to counter not only what's happening now, but we have to counteract all that baggage that we received as a heritage from previous generations. So it's important for Ukraine to study quickly, to learn things in a prompt manner. And on the other hand, it's important to do it in a proper way, using the practices of crisis communication, using a synchronized approach. You cannot counter misinformation with misinformation. You have to use some other tools, and those are the tools which are being implemented and used by Ukraine, not for the first year. And back in 2011, one of the important instruments was the law on access to the public information, and it was one of the first steps, because openness is best in counteracting disinformation. And in 2015 we disclosed the archives of KGB, So unmirrored response is very important, but proper communication and timely communication is important too, to communicate in proper messages to proper audience. And this guide, I think, is a guidance for those who helps concentrate to focus their ideas on what should be done during some crisis event. And why it's important, because misinformation is based on emotions. So it's targeted at the emotions of the audience, is targeted at, well, recall all those charged matters, shell gas. They are targeted at some emotional things. So when this misinformation is spread at somebody, you react emotionally. When you're being told lies about, you react emotionally. So it's difficult to be unemotional during this moment. It's very important to stop, exhale, and to recall what's the proper way to react, because emotion is harmful in this case. So it's important to make a proper message, to build it in a proper way, and to deliver it through a proper channel. So we're happy that this type of guide appeared, and we were happy to review it and to give our advice how to amend it. And it shows how to pick misinformation, how to tell it from the truth, because misinformation uses our vulnerabilities, and one of the vulnerabilities of Ukrainians is lack of trust. We learn how to trust. We made it within the last year probably, but let's be honest in front of us. Our distrust is quite widespread everywhere. So it's important to build trust in front of your audience, first of all, with honesty, with faithfulness, and with corroboration, providing proper facts, corroborating it with the documents. Well, it will not work at once, but if you do it in a systemic manner, it will start working eventually. So we want to thank our colleagues who prepared this guide. It will be useful, I hope. And it was interesting to me personally to read it, because some of the things, it helped me to structure them, those things in my mind, the massive of data which I was able to structure. It's useful for the public sector because it's under constant information attack by the enemy. So thank you, and I'm open to all the questions. Thank you. I'm having the first question. If anyone else has more questions, please let us know. My question is simple. Where can I download this guide? Where can I get it? How can I get involved? Well, first of all, those attending this presentation today who will get a free copy, they would be able to pick it personally. There is a number of specimens right there near the entrance door. The representatives of the organizations, of the educational institutions who wish to add this guide to their libraries, I encourage them to talk to Victoria after this press conference and to leave application with them, and we will get in touch with you to provide the necessary number for your library, and the guide will be posted for free online. We are currently in negotiations with our partners to have this guide translated into English language, so it will have the international coverage. Any more questions in the studio, please? Good afternoon. Oleksandr Bondarenko, head of the chair of the East Slavic Philology of University of Zrazhevska. First of all, thank you. And right away, I would like to say that I will use this guide during my lectures and practical classes for my students. My question is as follows. Is there a prospect for development of something else? We understand that this is not it. It's a very important step. It's very good. It's done, but not all of the problems are covered. Are there any plans for issue of some second part or third part, or is it planned as a series to have a stack of them like this thick, to have this thick guidebook that we would be able to use efficiently in our work? Thank you for your intention to use it. We currently prepare another guide, but it's a little bit different. It's more about strategic communications, but generally it's one of the parts of counteraction of misinformation. So these two guides are not related to each other directly, but in fact they are the parts of one thing, and we encourage everybody to get familiarized with the other one. And this guide is based on the practical experience, and in course of our training programs we will accumulate feedback, practical experience of the people we work with, so that we could prepare new recommendations in response to that feedback. Any more questions? If there are no more questions on the floor, I will have a question myself. There is a hybrid war going on, and my question is it possible to win this war, and what will be the indicator of such victory? Well, I would like to focus your attention on the title, How to Win in the Information Front. We had discussions as to the title of the book. I personally think that it's a little bit incorrect to win, because the victory in information front, there is no final victory in information front. Ihor already mentioned that this war it did not start today or yesterday. It's going on for centuries maybe. So we have to emphasize that the information war is going on forever, and we cannot say that we won today. We put the gadget on the wall and we may sit back and relax. So this is an ongoing process, and as long as the perpetrators, the enemies exist, there will be information influence, information impact of bigger or smaller intensity, but we have to be ready for it at all times. If anybody has anything to add, please go ahead.
Thank you. That's confusing. I would just add very quickly to that a point that came up during discussions in when I was at a meeting in Brussels fairly recently, and I think I mentioned earlier about UK communication systems being 100 years of mistakes and learning from those mistakes. Just as old as that process and that learning from mistakes has been, it was mentioned earlier, disinformation is nothing new, and it will continue. The Russians are using the same tactics that they've used for 100 years, if not more. And they get smarter and they change new narratives and they do things, but it's generally still the same sort of tactics. And I think, as with so much of Russian, you can draw analogies between the information warfare and kinetic warfare. Their approach is to have stuff that's okay and have lots and lots and lots of it, an overwhelming amount, so that you have human waves attacks in their kinetic warfare, you have information wave attacks. And I think that's always worked quite well, because if you're one against all of that overwhelming wave, that's very difficult. But it's not just one anymore. I think we've all woken up to this, and so I think this is where you have the Ukrainian government, you have the British government, you also have all of our colleagues in Europe, all of our partners in America, in Canada, and lots of people are engaged in this and looking at this. So your initial question was, can we win? I do agree that this goes on and on and on, but I think that wave attack, if it now is meeting a whole wall of other, truthful information grounded in the right tactics and the right approaches, I think it's inevitable that we will win. This increasingly, their tactics will not work in the future. I strongly believe that. So wanted to add that.
Якщо так, звичайно.
Я ще додам до першої.
I would also like to add a little bit. If the question is, are we winning at this moment? My vision is that without modesty, we can say that yes, we are winning, and it may be confirmed. It doesn't necessarily move that it's a final process, and if we are winning at this very moment, it doesn't necessarily mean that we may relax. It's not over yet. It's too early to relax. So my summary is that counteraction to disinformation is when there is no victory and final goal, but there is a noble way. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the teacher of history of Mariupol Lyceum of City of Kiev. I would like to thank you for this guide, and should we had it back in 2014, it would be way better. It's not like I'm having a question, but it's rather an opinion. Now the information influence is way weaker than in 2014 because we've done a lot within these 8 years. And maybe thanks to the fact that sick Putin just crossed out everything that some people that used to hesitate, that they had doubts about. But since I lived in Mariupol, I follow the events, what's going on there. So what's gonna happen to information policy after we win in the battlefield? Do we have some recommendations or mechanism to fight for the hearts of the people who remain in the occupied territories? Because if we talk about the territories which are occupied since 2014, those are different people now who live there. Their identity, their conscience is different. But those who remain in the territories occupied since February 2022, they start changing gradually. They're all Ukrainian citizens, and we have to bring them back. But the very complicated question is how to do it. If we talk about DPR, there's a lot of blood. If we talk about Crimea, there's less blood, but in DPR there's a lot of violence, a lot of blood, and DPR treat their population worse than the Russians themselves. And what can we do to bring those people back in future to Ukraine? Well, let me start. This is a question for the whole another press conference. I'll try to be concise and go step by step. Really, this guide is based on the experience, not only experience of the training center, but practical experience starting from 2014. Really, the situation we're having in information space now is the result of years of work starting from 2014. I will not give a lot of details about what was done, but we can talk about it separately. But there was a lot done, and as of that 24th February 2022, we came there with well prepared in the information front, which allows us to keep doing what we're doing. And regarding the population in the occupied territories, what Russians do is they try to build the information wall. They try to create the information ghetto. They switch off Ukrainian TV. They close Ukrainian websites. They even try to switch internet traffic to Russian servers so their special services could control it. So this is how they build this information wall to have the Ukrainians who remain there kept in a way they don't receive any faithful information from Ukraine, because in fact Russian propaganda can exist only without competition, and that's why they kill all the competitors. So our task is to make it that way that the Ukrainians who remain in the occupied territories, they continue receiving information from Ukraine. What should be the ways? Well, it's a number of ways, technical ways, hardware and software solutions, and each of us may get involved. Anybody who has contacts, anybody who has relatives, or just people they know in the occupied territories, keep them in the agenda, in the information agenda of Ukraine. Those are the main steps. I would like to add that this is the question for million, and even the European experience shows that it's a long story, and it's better to see the story of two Germanys, West and East Germany, and those steps that were undertaken during decades, they still demonstrate the gap that existed. So let's be realistic and let's recognize that it's a problem which will require long-term campaign. The first steps, yes, I agree that it should be accessibility of information, the reestablishment of all digital information infrastructure, all information services available in Ukraine. People should be able to see that the bureaucracy changed, and a lot of things that required bargains or corruption before, they became better. Things changed. So, but we have to be more profound in our work. We have to start studying the mentality. I don't like the word Donbass, but historically those places, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, they are quite complicated. So working with cold Donbass, with Luhansk region, with Mariupol, and those industrial areas of those regions, those are very, very complicated. There will be no prompt response, but it's obvious that we should keep working there. And one of the key things is the fair justice for Ukraine. When people will understand that their property is protected, when their crimes are punished, there is liability for crimes. It's one of the proper ways for the development of democracy of Ukraine, and one of the reforms that we should undertake. We've already undertaken a number of complicated reforms, including information reforms, and the law of media is yet another challenge for us, because depending on how it's launched, the information space would work. But there are things you may never add to the laws. You cannot add patriotism, you cannot add fairness, honesty in the law. Those are things that are educated, and we hope that we will be able to launch mechanisms to build trust, and which is one of the key things to build in Ukraine, and this is how we will be able to move further. And as to the misinformation, don't relax. Again, this law on media, we're having this campaign in Europe against us, which says that the law is bad, so let's not let Ukraine join EU. So it's too early to relax. What I would also like to add on behalf of the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, we're not the same we're used to be on 24th of February 2022. We're different, but from the very first day the territories were liberated, we all got united. The representatives of media, the local governances, we started spreading the information where people can get money, where they can get aid. From the very first days when people were in information isolation in Kherson, the newspapers Grivnia, New Day, people didn't know what's Bucha, what's Irpin. We started making special issues right away, and those special issues are still on. On the way are Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv regions and other occupied territories. We are ready for that. what I said at the beginning, no matter who we are, but we're all united, and we believe in the closest victory. Our information troops, we will work the reestablishment of telecommunications infrastructure, support of the media, creation of favorable conditions for spreading proper social information is our utmostly important task that we do in cooperation with our partners. And I will remind you that our mental deoccupation will happen after our physical deoccupation. So the main fighter in the information front is the armed forces of Ukraine. So we will wrap up at this optimistic note. We were talking about the guide hybrid war of Russia against Ukraine, how to win the information warfare, but in fact we covered other topics. I want to thank all of our guests. We will continue our operation at 1800 today. Thanks everybody.